simply do not pay electricity bills. Delhi was the exception. They privatized the 3 distribution businesses there. What they have seen, and I give just one example, is a very significant reduction in technical losses. These were the results for the 3 companies over the last 10 years. And you can see the magnitude of the changes from, say, 53% to 13%, and similarly for the other 2 companies. And in addition, these companies have put in much more new investment, including to improve reliability, to reduce the amount of theft. They've introduced new approaches such as online billing. They've given rewards to timely payment of bills. So this has made a significant difference. Now I want to look at the competitive area where we have retail competition in the UK. Now, I'm afraid that's always been a controversial policy. I say that because I have always supported it, but I have not always been able to persuade everybody that it's a good idea. What we provide is that every customer in the UK can choose which electricity supplier they wish to supply them with electricity through the distribution network. And what we have seen is that there is indeed a choice of supplier. There are 6 main suppliers in Britain and probably another 6 very small ones. You get a variety of tariffs. Some people are complaining that there are too many tariffs. Some people say they've calculated 400 tariffs. Somebody else says it's 4,000. At any rate, there's a great variety of tariffs. And there's no doubt that in many respects the service to customers has improved. It has to be said, however, that there have been some problems with metering and billing these customers. There have been mistakes. There have been delays because of that. And recently there have been problems with what is called doorstep selling, where the suppliers come to your door and try to persuade you to change your supplier. And it turns out that not all these new suppliers offer better prices. So some people have questioned whether the costs and the benefits for residential suppliers actually make sense. Well, I noticed that over half, maybe as many as 3/4 of the customers in Britain have now switched their supplier. So people said that it wouldn't happen, that customers would not understand this. It's not true. They have changed. And it seems to me that prices in the UK pretty accurately reflect the wholesale costs of supply. There are some concerns about the profits of the suppliers, particularly in the last few weeks when they seem to have increased. But what I think a closer inspection shows is that the real problem is not the retail competition, but the movements in wholesale costs and the increases in fuel costs. And this is what is causing the problems. Now, one aspect that I think is worth mentioning is that when we introduced retail competition, we realized that other suppliers would have to use the distribution network. Therefore, it was going to be important to separate the management of the distribution wires from the retail supply. So we required that there should be separate companies. They could be in the same ownership, but the companies would be separate. They had to have separate accounts, for example. What we have found is that that has been very important in clarifying the responsibilities of the different managers in the company. And each of these businesses, the retail supply business and the network wires business, they each have better incentives to be efficient because they can be held to account for those operations for which they're responsible. And the efficiency in both businesses have improved. It's also meant that it's possible for the companies to specialize. Some companies say, we are good at running wires businesses, we understand investment, we are engineers, but we don't understand the market. We will sell our supply business to someone else. Other people say, we would like to be in the electricity sector. We don't have the opportunity to build a new network, but we can buy and sell electricity, and we understand how customers think. We can design tariffs that will be attractive to them. So what we now find is that almost all, I think about 10 out of the 14 distribution companies, are now quite separate from any retail supply. I want to illustrate this concept of separation between the distribution business and the retail supply business from another sector, from the water sector. This has happened in Scotland, where they have introduced retail competition in the water sector in Scotland, and they have separated the various pipes that supply water from the companies that deal with the customers, and they've done that for the last 5 years. And what they now report is that there are significantly lower costs in both types of businesses. The supply business, which was previously operating on a very thin margin, has now increased its margin. It's roughly doubled the margin it operates on. It has lower working capital requirements than it did before because it pays better attention to this. It's managed to roughly halve the amount of bad debt that it has, and the regulator estimates that the increased value from separation is at least £130 million. So in a quite different sector where you would have thought that competition is not possible, it has been possible, at least for the larger customers, and it has delivered better, greater efficiency and better management. I now want to come on to the issue of poverty and fuel poverty. That must be a problem in most countries, and it certainly is in the UK. And the problem that I guess has been characteristic of this country, of India, of the UK, is that it seems difficult to set electricity prices to reflect electricity costs when many customers don't seem to be able to afford to pay those costs. And this is a problem in the UK too. The concept of fuel poverty has been introduced there, which is a person or a household is said to be in fuel poverty when the cost of buying their fuel exceeds 10% of their income. Now, on average, this is not a problem. In the UK, on average, about 3% of households are in fuel poverty, a little bit lower in London, rather higher in Northern Ireland. But if you look at those households that are in fuel poverty, it was 26% back in 96, went down to 6% in 2003 when fuel prices were low, is now up to 18%, and in Northern Ireland it's actually 34%, and we suspect it's higher in the last year or two. So it's now becoming a very significant political problem. Well, how is the government dealing with this? Are there pressures to return the industry to government ownership? The answer is no. Are they following a policy of reducing all electricity prices and incurring financial losses and having to be subsidized across the board? The answer is no. They are looking at various more targeted ways of dealing with this problem. For example, one of the first things that the companies did after the sector was reformed was to introduce tariffs that had no standing charges. So customers that used very small amounts of electricity would have only small bills. The government has put in some funding so that companies can offer what they call affordability tariffs, lower prices to households that are poor. There are payments made to all customers, in fact, in the winter when the prices may be high and the need for using fuel is greatest. There are policies that no customers may be disconnected in the winter. I note that in Texas it's the summer that's the problem, and the summer that there's no disconnection. Probably the case here too. If customers get into debt, then the companies have an obligation to meet them and to discuss with them how to schedule that debt over time in a way that the customers can pay. In other words, they have to listen to what the customer's problems are. The companies are also required to engage in energy efficiency investments, and they are required to target